I was thinking about melancholy, because you have been talking quite a lot about it as sort of the end goal, that if a painting doesn't have melancholy, then it doesn't have the basic of what it should have. But you've also been just talking about 3 levels again, about first that you have the opaque, then that you have the poetic, and then you get to the melancholy. And I was just wondering if you could start with talking about that before we freestyle more about the different issues. What is the opaque level?
The opaque level is to make love, but not love. So you can find opaque masters in the history, marvelous painters like Rubens or Zorn.
Yeah, or Sargent.
Sargent, yes. They are opaque masters.
But that is
because they don't. There is no cry for help. You see, they are happy and everything goes.
Yeah.
So, and then you can say that you have people that has a lot of sorrow and resistance against them, and then we talk about Goya in a strange way, Cilvilis and Rembrandt and the early Munch, where you have these severe problems that bends your head down, and then you become a melancholic type, you can say it, melancholic type.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that in the long run, the melancholic types always win. And that the reason is probably that people in general, they can feel that they are in some kind of in family with these people, because the melancholy in your body is stronger than any other feelings, because there is a sort of an emptiness that has to be filled with something. So melancholy is, in some ways, you can say, the highest level, because it you can forget Rembrandt in 200 years, but not in 300 years in some ways.
It comes back.
Because the melancholy is so strong, so it comes back because of that. Not because he's clever, but simply that he can manage melancholy.
But then you have that issue. Wasn't it precisely Rembrandt's melancholy that made it a problem for him in the last part of his life?
Oh, yes.
In the immediate years after, where he wasn't so popular.
For Titian too.
Yeah.
And when he started to make melancholic pictures, it was in a very old age, so he had money enough to get a good life.
But then, to talk more about what melancholy is then, what I've thought about, and I want to hear if you agree or not, is that melancholy is when you realize what is really important. For example, I'm not sure if it's a good example, but if you have this group of friends laughing, having a great time, and someone suddenly tells one of them that his sister is badly hurt in the hospital, then they stop joking because something very much more important comes in. You get the comparison. You see that, okay, having fun is okay, but now something really serious has come in. Is that a good definition of melancholy, that you understand what is really important, so you don't have time for all this contemporary...
Yes, the melancholic mind is developing through your ages.
Yeah. So you would
very
get more
strongly. And I think that since you are a child and if you are abandoned and nobody wants to play with you, it starts there in some ways. It starts with big wounds in your memory. The paradox is that the happy guys should have a wonderful future. But the happy guys doesn't have the melancholy. So they lose in the long run.
And that's Rubens.
Well, I think there is a lot. For example, Zorn is such a wonderful painter. But when you look at his self-portraits, he always looked like a sort of an authority as a director for a firm.
Yeah.
And he is not willing to give the mask away. He has to have a mask. And Rembrandt gives up the mask after he has painted all of this golden change that he wanted so bitterly. And he never got, of course. Only Van Dyck and Rubens got that, you know. But he was very, very he painted it so perfect, you know, this golden chain. And he didn't care so much about his own face. So after he had a lot of misery and concours, and that was really dangerous at that time.
Bankrupt, yeah.
If he had been sent to prison, he would die in prison, you know. Prisons at that time was horrible. So he had a serious drama in front of his life, a big threat that didn't leave. So, of course, he was scared to death.
Yeah.
And we don't understand it today because prison today is a sort of living in a hotel, more or less.
Comparatively, yeah.
Yes, and that was so... We don't understand the history behind it, just like with Munch, that he was investigated by the Norwegian Labour Party state for more than 20 years.
The IRS.
And that was a ruin for him because he didn't finish anything, and it was a nightmare. And the first I heard about him, it was my uncle. He was director for a bank, not a sous chef for a bank. And the first he told me when he was talking about Munch, because Munch was his client, was that Munch was totally ruined by mentally had big problems. He couldn't get out of that with this Norwegian government that was after him, and he couldn't concentrate because he had it in his mind all the time. So, well, Rembrandt was a little bit more matter-of-fact guy. So he could take it and use it. And then you have the late Rembrandt. That is so wonderful. That actually has saved his reputation for hundreds of years in the future. Probably more, because he became a really good painter out of it. But Munch, it didn't help Munch.
That's a very strange thing, that you have a person like Munch who in the beginning had the melancholy of an old man, so to speak, painting Sixth Child and some other things. But then he had this allegiance to the values of the time. And I think that's where he lost that melancholy, because melancholy necessarily should be something else than the values of the time or the fashion of the time.
There was a letter from Eilif Petersen to Munch, you know, where he said that you must be careful now because kitsch is now the bad word, you know. So be careful. don't make pictures that can be understood as sketch, because then you are in trouble, he said. And Munch was, I don't know how much he listened to that, but it is hard when things change like that. So I think Munch took it seriously, and it changed also his way of painting, which was sad in some ways, because the greatest things of Elmar Munch is made before he become social.
Yeah.
I mean, social with all these pictures about workers in snow, man in the acres or something.
Yeah, because you have quotes from him where he's very much political. Now is the time for the workers.
Yes.
And then you are just supposed to be a cheerleader for the new thing that is coming. And then he loses all that melancholy.
Yeah. But you can say he loses his own reason why he paints.
Yeah.
So I think it's a complex story, because he was such a great mind, that man. But Rembrandt had another destination. He simply pictured his life.
Right. Yeah.
He did what his life was in some ways.
Mm. Well, then he also was able to use these mythic stories, biblical stories, and find some connection to his own situation in those. Yeah.
Of course.
Because I think that's connected to the whole idea of melancholy. Because then if you shall make something that is eternal, it would have to be melancholy. It can't, per definition, not be reflective of the time. But then the other question is, then do you go and illustrate myths that you read, or do you discover your own motifs like that?
Yeah, I know.
So because even Joseph Campbell has been talking about how myths have to change with the time also, so you have to relate something to the time so that people understand it.
Okay.
But I think that is a bit strange.
It's about the language then.
Yes.
Simply words. But,
yeah, I guess so. But I mean, if you really get to the core of, if you do it through a biblical story or through a Greek story or through just having experienced something yourself, and you see that this is an archetypal situation, then you shouldn't have to, you should be able to paint Apollo and Daphne if you really understand what that story is about, if you have that, if you see the melancholy of it. Or what do you think about?
I think that story is very difficult to make to be a melancholic.
It could be any kind of story.
Yes, but I think that the melancholic painters or drawers or sculptures will always be remembered in some ways, and all the painters or sculptors that are more style oriented will be forgotten, because melancholy is something that everybody has a little piece of, and they will recognize it immediately. Yeah. So it will always be interesting to study another melancholic, how he mastered to live with his melancholic situation.
Yeah.
So the melancholic work will always have a more glittering future than this opaque,
it's a long-term
wonderful life, like what the wolf eats the lambs and the lambs eat the grass, like that, That is opaque life. Opaque love is not really love. It's only just like you try to get a girl this evening and she says no. And when she say no, you think, okay, I can find another one. But when you are in love, that is a metaphysics standard.
Yeah.
And so when she don't want you, then you are going to die or something horrible, and you can't forget it, and you go into a psychotic situation, and it takes a long time before you get rid of the problems. And metaphysics is that it's a strange thing, because metaphysics is, for me personally, more something you have to get through so you understand where you are. Just like you have a problem with a painting and you don't get it, and you try and try and try and try. You don't get the solution, and that is a metaphysic problem, because metaphysics is, of course, all the things you don't know anything about. So when you get in love, you are starting with a big problem. How will this go? If you are really in love and you are insecure, you see. If you get the love, you are finished with the metaphysics. At last, you take her for granted. You know, it is not a problem anymore. But if you don't get her, you get a big metaphysic problem. And you have to go to a lot of poetry about love and, perhaps get it published even, if it's not too much feelings and more opaque things going on. Because the society don't really understand what you are doing when you have a love sickness like that. So you have to be a little bit opaque too, so you can be understood by the society.
So opaque is, you're not using it solely in the way the painting is painted. I mean, I can understand also in terms of technique why Zorn is opaque. Quite clear. It's paint strokes.
Opaque is something we all understand very well.
Yeah.
And we laugh a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we know that that is the half of the way. You see, it's the halfway. You don't, as I said, you don't cry if you have an opaque problem. That is just like you shall have a post-pack in the office and it's delayed, That is an opaque problem.
Yeah.
I have to wait 2 more days
for the package
before I get the package. You see, it's more like animals' lives, I think.
So, but then also this thing about poetic, or having the poetic attitude, is that the same as the melancholy?
Yes, it's on the way to the melancholic level.
Yeah. But then I'm thinking, which painter is then
poetic is very important, actually.
Yeah. So which painter is poetic then, but not melancholy? Is there such an example?
I think there is a familiarity here that we perhaps could look a little bit at.
Yeah.
Because if you paint a modern painting, if you there is a pupil of me named Alistair, and we were looking at the picture. We took the picture upside down.
Yeah.
And we looked at the sick child, Munch, and immediately the picture wasn't gripping anymore. It was just red color here in the golden triangle, and it was all these other things. It was what he said, Alistair, something very interesting. This is an object, not a picture anymore, but it's an object. And there we are in the modernistic way of thinking.
Yeah.
It's object. It's an object. So, and that's very interesting, because if you look at all the painters, you can look at the Prodigal Son of Rembrandt, and you take it ups and downs, and it's an abstract solution. You see, composition. And the poetic is the opposite of the what you call it, the objective. Because the poetry you have to do with your hand. I can't understand that the poet can make poetry on the typewriter, you know.
Yeah.
It's strange. It is just like it goes from your hand and your body and your soul. Everything is a totality, and your hand can in many ways help your brain. Especially if you draw or do something visual.
You have that sensual contact with what you're doing.
Yeah. And the hand can do something that shocks the brain. You see? Where your brain, oh God, what have I done? And that's very interesting, because that brings us to another matter, that the machines shall do everything. You know, photo is a robot. So when people talk about, think one day the robot will take over everything, and I can say to them, well, the robot has taken everything, because they made the photo in 32 or 33 or something, 1830. It has conquered everything. If you think about it, the photo technique. And in some ways you can say that if you shall create poetry, it's not enough with a photograph, it has to be a film. A dramatic film can make the poetry. Because there is a lot of, just like letters in a book, there is a lot of small parts that together makes the poetry. Mm. And in paintings, it's modernism is not poetry. Modernism is simply to take it ups and downs, as with Kant when he talks about the perfect face is the bad face, and the ugly face is the good face, you know. So it's just like you take the face ups and down, as he talks about.
See it as an abstract, completely abstract thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you get a Kantian project. Mm-hmm. The Kantian said something that the perfect face, this beautiful face, is stupid. So you can say that the sick child is stupid when you look at it the right way, because then you get a lot of feelings. And feelings is stupid for a professor in Germany, you know. It's bad thinking. It's just because even a proletarian or some people can have feelings. So feelings is very underrated in some ways. And I'm talking about real feelings, not stupid things going on.
Well, you have feelings that you experience from a dramatic situation, or you have feelings that you feel because it pays off to have those feelings at present.
Well, the poetic feelings. And that's very strange, because I think that the origin behind everything that is sane is poetic. Yeah. So if you have a true, if you want to create something, and you will go in depth, empirically in depth, then you are a poet in some ways. You are making poet out of an ordinary situation in some ways.
Yeah, so which is why you want to get away from the naturalist approach, because then it's more or less mere copying, but you need to add the poetic.
The naturalism is a little bit like, I will try to make a photo, I too.
Yeah. Well, that's what we've said, that there is perhaps an even, I'm not quoting you correctly, you said something like, one problem is to paint after a photo, but it's a bigger problem if you think like a photo, like a camera, when you paint.
Oh yes, that's also.
I mean, if you think about it, it's you know, democracy might be a good thing, but not in painting, because if you should give everything the same value, then you lose the direction, you lose the poetry.
In some ways, you are intoxicated.
Yeah.
And if your picture looks like a criminal novel, you are intoxicated. You see, it has very little value. Because what's going on if you make, for example, Ivan Terrible killing his son of Ilya Repin, you have a poetic problem in this reality that he tried to make. He has even the same carpet on the floor as I have in my own stove. It's very painful to look at because it looks so strange.
When he goes so much into detail, he's starting to take the attention away from the actual moment,
But it's fantastic, that expression of that old man.
Yeah, I remember I saw that in a book in your studio. The first thing I saw was the detail of his face. And I mean, that's maybe not necessarily melancholic, typically melancholic, if you compare it to the Father of the Prodigal Son by Rembrandt. But when you mention that, I think about something that is also related, and it has to do with this thing about quiet motifs, quiet pictures. Not a lot of Baroque action, then big bang going on.
It's a sort of a quiet scream.
Yeah, because if you think about Ivan Terrible killing his son, if he had made that as Ivan is hitting him and the sun is falling and the arms are gesticulating, you would perhaps, just by pure logic, you would think, oh, that must be more gripping because it's more action.
No.
But then when you look at all of these masterworks, if you look at the Prodigal Son, you look at some of these icons that you've been concerned with and that I'm starting to look into, it's all
calm down. That's right.
Yeah.
The death of Bara of David, there is a lot of people that made that scene of several of these people living in the same time as him. And it looks horrible because there's a lot of people coming and
she is
claiming Charlotte Corday that she has done something very wrong here. and so
well, that's
so it's very simple. Bara is lying and he has got his he is wounded and he is dead, bang. And you can see it when you compare it. I have a book where you can compare it. All these other people making this scene.
That other thing, painting by David, Madame Recamier.
Oh yeah.
Where she's this planet in this vast universe, and then she wasn't happy with it, and she got that. I never forget it, if I remember his name, the other French painter. And she's just lying there like a prostitute.
I don't know exactly Rigaud now. It's something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway, I mean, it's very present.
Oh yes.
And that is so strange because I cannot explain.
You see a little piece of the castle she lives in.
Everything is described.
Yes, okay.
But I had some similar experience when I was in London. You see, there's a self-portrait there by Jan Lievens, and it's well painted, of course. But it was something was very what's the word? Uncomfortable about it.
Oh.
And I think what made me uncomfortable looking at it was that this is a person who is very much in the time and knows how to operate in the time. He had that sort of security in the gaze that people who are in the group, they have the security. They don't have to defend their views. They just have the security. So there was something of that in his look. And I can only describe it as modern because he seemed very present as a local geocentric person. And you don't have that, of course.
There was a lot of these people at that time too.
Yeah.
This money.
Yeah. Yeah. You see it in the way all the details of the dress is painted, the silk.
They knew how to fix it.
Yeah.
And these people has been a disaster always, in every time.
That must be what was so problematic with the author of the Batavians, Claudius Cilvilis, by Rembrandt.
Oh.
When they didn't want it, and then what was the other, his student who got the order and he painted it in 4 days or something like that.
Okay.
And they got the replacement replacement there because that, of course you have this.
I thought it was Coward Flink that died.
That might be.
His pupil died.
Okay.
And he took over. He wasn't chosen actually for that.
Oh yes.
So it tells something about Rembrandt in sometimes that he got a chance and he hired a big studio and had a lot of. He had to pay for a lot of things to get a studio to make this big picture, and it was not accepted. And then he had to cut it in pieces so he could use the other canvases.
The extra canvas for portraits.
Yes. And they think that the extra canvas on the top of was full of darkness, and that is this man with the falcon.
Oh,
in Gothenburg is painted on
same canvas.
Yes, the same canvas, because it's very thickly prepared. You can see it. It's very thickly prepared, with some green-brown color. From earth to life. That's also why I can't stand the white commercial canvas, because you have to begin with the earth, and then you can
build up
to be life from the earth. That's why we use earth color as a beginning. And the preparation with mud or with earth, and from earth shall you come, and to earth shall you be ending in,
back to soil.
Back to soil.
So that's why strong colors are the total opposite of melancholy. I mean, if you have a very nice conversation in front of the fire, and someone comes in and turns on the lights in the ceiling, and everything is flooded with light, then the whole mood is destroyed, right?
But if you look at colors, isn't the most beautiful colors make you feel poetic feelings?
Yes.
It's strange though, and if you paint and you, for example, see these red clothes with a background of green, you get a feeling, and you look at Rembrandt, that everything is so settled, so warm and so wonderful. So I think that it begins with the soil, and from soil you make colorful results, but always from the soil and up.
It's
and not from the top with a lot of colors, and you have to try to get it a little bit moderated,
It's sort of what Jung is talking about when he talks about the pietist priest who wants to go to spirituality up, start on the top, and then the same Puritan priest has a dream where he has to go down in a valley before he can go up, very striveful, going up a mountain. And he gets disappointed because he wants to go to the spirituality at once. So it's like you have to, if you shall reach some kind of spirituality or some deeper meaning or whatever, you have to go the opposite way. You have to start digging in the soil.
Yes, because if you begin as a modern painter with a lot of choices, it ends with that you have to get the colors down all the time.
Yeah.
So why not begin with colors that doesn't have to go down? Like that.
And that the colors are not really a specific color.
Oh, yes.
Like a non-color.
Aristotle talk about that.
Yeah.
A color the light in the color does just exist when you blend two colors. You see. You have to blend colors to get light.
Yeah, that's so strange. Because when you read Kant, then the Critique of Judgment, and it talks about the drawing, which is the main part, and then the color comes in and just colors the drawing. And so the whole basis for what the modern mind is trained to do is to not be in contact with any kind of melancholy. And I mean, melancholy or kitsch are just two synonyms, right? if you're on a very high level.
Yes, absolutely, because it comes from your melancholic.
Yeah.
And that's and also it's when you look at really wonderful drawings like Munch's early graphic, the etchings, you see the lines is just like colors, and it's black and white, but it looks like colors because the lines is so beautiful. So you can make a coloristic picture with only black and white, or more or less.
Yeah, you don't miss the color.
I think that mostly when we talk about colors, when I look at the Titian's late picture Flying on Marsyas, I can't really remember the colors.
Yeah.
I remember the colors in the Prodigal Son of Rembrandt because this red is so apparent. Or the Jewish Bride. I mean, but the rest I don't remember very much as colors. So after all, I think that when I look at the best pictures I have seen, there is very little colors. Think about the Madame Recamier of David. That is so extremely wonderful, but I don't remember the colors. It could be in black and white for me.
Yeah.
So colors is something that disturbs more than it helps in paintings at all, I think. If you think about all these painters from the Baroque that use this blue, very strong blue, very strong red, very strong yellow, green, it didn't help very much.
It's like strong colors then have the same kind of negative effect as having too much detail, because you start taking attention to all of these details or to all of these different colors. So colors and too much color, or too strong colors and too much detail take attention away from the story that is being told. Because it's interesting. I mean, you can talk about this in metaphysical terms. It has to be a melancholic expression, which is not exactly how the strokes are placed. But you can also look at the concretes, like with color and detail. But also what I've seen is, if you compare the really good icons with not so good icons, and also within painting, Western painting, it was very strange to see. You look at the really good icon painters that have the contour line of the whole figure, like Greek way of thinking, one whole figure. And then you get the bad painters, and then there's a lot of patterns and crosses and the different variation of the dress and these things, and you don't see the contour line of the figure, so it just becomes like an abstract pattern. And then there's
Are you thinking of Dionysos then? Because Dionysos is extremely clever with proportions, like that.
So the figures, and that's another thing. So the figure then is almost flat. But it has that vibrancy, so of course it's not modernist flat.
But it doesn't look like flat.
No. And that's the same thing you see with Rembrandt, you see it with Georges Latour, you see it with Titian also, that you have that flatness.
Late Titian.
Yeah.
Please.
Yes, you have the flatness and the contour line, and within the contour line there's almost nothing.
Yes, I see.
But vibration.
In and out breath. If you look at a lot of people in front of a dictator or something, they all have, you see, in and out breath. And if a picture doesn't have that, something lacks. Have you think that's very strange? So when you look at the last pictures of Titian, it has this breath, but I can't find so much breath in the earlier works of him.
No.
That's why it's so strange and special with Titian's last pictures. And you find it very little. You find it very short. You find it in, for example, your darling Constable, the latest pictures For example, this horse.
Living horse, yeah.
Yeah. It's just like a big breath. You know?
Yeah.
And that is also something very interesting. Why is it so strong at, for example, leaping horse and flying on Marsyas? But you find it very seldom in paintings that have this quality. You can find it in the big drawing from National Gallery of Da Vinci, the Saint Anna drawing. But it's very seldom you find this breath. I think that probably is because you are so engaged in trying to understand nature that you forget to make the picture beautiful.
You forget the poetry or the melancholy.
Yeah.
Because you want to inform and to show that you are
want
skilled.
to see it, how it is.
Yeah.
Not to make a fine, nice painting, but, knocking at the door of the nature, you have talked about it yourself.
Yeah.
You have such compassion for it. So you will even have the Celsius grades of what you paint. Celsius.
Yeah.
That's a system of cold and warm. And I'm telling my pupils, look at the picture and think about, the breath. And if the breath is not there, it's a problem.
Well, is that the same thing as... I think you can have several examples, but if you look at the sick child and you look at the mother sitting there,
yeah,
and you can look at it and you can feel how it feels if you're sitting like that. You can feel the heaviness of the neck of how she's sitting there. You can really identify physically with what is going on there.
Yes,
I think that's one part of it, and it's
yes,
I think on a metaphysical level too. That you what happens with for example, at Leonardo drawing, is that everything becomes one big form.
Yeah.
So it's part of sort of an Eastern way of thinking. Everything is connected. Everything is one organism. This is Joseph Campbell material. Everything is connected.
It's
nature.
a whole figure.
Yeah.
Yes, but you can also say that you can find painters that doesn't have a breath at all. And that's very interesting because you learn even about the breath when you see people that doesn't have breath, because they think, this is not well. For example, anger, the portrait of anger. Yes. And it has no breath. It's just like a wax cabinet. And he is so clever, Anger. He can make striking portraits. But even the skin on the arm doesn't breathe. So it's very interesting to see paintings from history that very few has that quality in the history about painting. Very few. And probably that's why we are passing so many pictures in, for example, Vienna, the big museum there. So many old masterly pictures, which doesn't strike us. We don't look at it, we just pass it.
Then
we see one picture of Titian, one place, but the rest is, you pass it.
Yeah. But it's that, then coming back to the muted colors, this grayness. When things are muted, it's like, if you look at Titian, it's like he's mixing air into the paint as he's working.
Well, you can say that he disturbs our eyes, so we shall never be, what do you call it? He makes a sort of a dialogue with a dialogue in some ways. You can say a dialogue with a dialogue with a dialogue. because he painted upon each other so many times, he scrape out, that it becomes a sort of a dialogue with himself in some ways. And that's probably why we feel that it has such a breath. You know? Breath. But it doesn't stay still, you know.
Then you're talking about specifically how it's painted. The surface is not, I mean, if Sargent is stroke, and it looks like an eye, but it's built out of strokes. Yeah. But in this here, you have all these layers playing together, and that's what creates that transparency.
Yes, right. Because he has painted something the first day, and the next day he looks at it, and it's too opaque. Yeah. And when it's too opaque, he has to scrape it out because he wanted to have more life. Yeah. More breath all the time. It's about how greedy are you? How greedy are you when you look at your own picture?
You're lust for life.
How greedy are you?
It reminds me of something. I mean, when I was a student, and this was in the 90s, you talked about the metaphoric in the painting, like in the actual paint layer, and I didn't understand that. And then I listened to Ibsen's plays, and then I suddenly realized when they say something to each other, it's a very normal sentence, that has like a tunnel and it goes and relates to another thing that is said later in the play, and then you start to see that it's two things at the same time. Like when Nora and Dr. Ronk, they say goodnight to each other, meaning that he shall die and she shall go into a different situation, right? But it's just good night. And then when I saw Titian, the nymph and shepherd in Vienna, and I saw the spine, her back there, and from a distance you can see it, but you go in and it's not there, and you go from a distance, it's there again.
Okay.
So you have these things being two things at the same time.
Yes.
I think that's.
Yes, that's very interesting, and it's really a problem I have with him in my last pictures, so I know about that. I know very much, I know a lot about these things, that some things have to come back in the same picture. Yeah. It's a sort of, because if you see Zorn, you can see everything is so wonderful, but it's no challenge in the dimensions of things. No. In Titian, for example, that Flying on Marsyas, there is a lot of challenge. Some things he hasn't done really well, actually, in that picture. It's too heavy on the left side. It hasn't really been done on the left side. It's the right side that keeps the picture to be a masterpiece. Yeah.
But then all these things balance each other out so well that it's okay.
Yeah, but it's a little bit a problem with the right side. It's something of that big person that I think it's Apollon that is.
That's bending down and.
Yeah, yes, bending down too. And it's well.
But what do you think about the? I mean, this is something that I thought about with that picture, that it at least in that case, but I don't know if you can say it's a general rule, but it's like one painting should have more than one story. It shouldn't just be one thing. And this thing about if you see it the right way, it's a tragedy. But then you flip it. Speaking of seeing it upside down, suddenly you have a second picture where he's victorious, and he rises. He rises above the timely matters and the contemporary mob.
He smiles,
and he is a resurrected Christ or something like that. Yeah. It seems like that also is a big part here, that you have to have this picture has to be the opposite at the same time. Or
yes, but it's the same as if you make an evil person, he has to have something that you get sympathy for.
Yes.
If it's only evilness, it's not so interesting.
Yeah. Which is why horror movies are boring, because it's just evil and
It's nothing. Yes, you can say that now we are in a very interesting mood because in the Ibsen's best dramas, you never know really what will happen at last.
Yeah.
But in all the dramas from the Shakespearean theater, they all kill each other at last. You know.
Yeah.
They're killed, all of them, you know.
But okay, but that reminds me also another thing I want to ask you because or discuss. This thing about that I can't get out of my head that I got from Campbell. He talks about tragedy, but he says there's a higher level above that, and that's the mythic level.
Who says that?
Joseph Campbell.
Okay.
So I presume. So I presume, for example, King Oedipus is a tragedy, and he sticks out his eyes, and everything falls apart, and that's quite sort of everything goes down. But I think if you see the Marsyas painting, at least what I've seen in it, that he is both being flayed and he's a victor, then you get that next level. It comes back again, like in Norse mythology, everything goes down, and a new world comes. And I think that's probably what you would call
the result of the hero.
Yeah, but that's, I guess, what you would call divine comedy or the Buddha smile or something like that. There's some kind of quote-unquote comedy in that it's not only sad, it's not only going downwards, because something comes again.
It's if you paint a tragedy and you paint it wonderful, it's a sort of resurrection.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it, yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
If you paint a tragedy with a dry pencil, or a dry, not a pencil, brush, then it's only a tragedy.
Yeah, because if you have a person who has a geocentric mind, and you let him loose on a potentially heliocentric motif,
yeah,
it doesn't help that you have just skins and nothing contemporary clothing.
No, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work at all. But you can have someone with a heliocentric mind who can make something out of a geocentric context.
Yes, but you know, geocentric can conquer the world, but he can never make a good picture.
Yeah, the one who thinks like a geocentric.
Geocentric,
yeah.
You see.
But okay, but you said that you cannot make a, how do you say it? You cannot make a heliocentric masterwork with props from a specific time. But
it's very difficult, actually.
Yeah, but I cannot get out of my mind the Great Gatsby or Andrew Wyeth, or you even use an airplane in your paintings. Like, so how does that go together?
Well, if you have to, you have to. You know, it's it's what shall we do? You know, my mother had a horrible travel from the German police or the military, so she was nearly shot. She was on the border on her way to Sweden, you know, to get rid of the German. And when I painted that memory scene, I had to have an airplane. Because I was told about that there was an airplane in the sky that was, you know. So sometimes you have to do it, but the clouds are totally not directly from that time, but it's more like rags, but. I had to make that airplane in the air because I knew that they were looking for refuge. And at that time, it was very hard because they should be shot if they found them. So.
Oh God! Yeah, and I guess it's also not so much more difficult than. So, I mean, if you look at these great South American civilizations. They had huge cities and did these things. So if you see a painting in 500 years, you could probably understand that the gun is something they used to shoot with if they don't have guns anymore. I mean, it's a human thing to make clothes and to make weapons and to make...
Yes, that is a problem, actually. But no, I understand that it's a big problem, that I can't stand these things that is modern or made, because it changes all the time. So,
well, I guess it's the same thing as with color. If you use color and you're able to mute it, then it's fine. But if you use color as pure color, then it becomes a problem. The same thing with having details. You need some details, but not only details. And you can use some things that are more or less modern. But if you don't, the point is that you don't think as a photography machine. You don't think as a modern person, as a contemporary person, but you can use these things and make them more eternal somehow. And also, especially also if you do, I mean, the thing that I read through this book, Masterworks, and you talk about that with the reversed perspective, inverted perspective of the icons.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And that was fascinating, because then you were talking about how the picture sees you. It's God that sees you, and that was fascinating, because I read something in Jung where he talks about when you come into the collective unconscious, you are not you are not the subject perceiving objects around you. You are the object being perceived by eternity. And that's some next level thing. That is amazing. If you can
know that something from the universe looks at you.
Yeah. You are being perceived by the universe, by eternity, by God, or instead of you standing there as a geocentric painter painting that landscape or whatever you're doing, right?
Interesting.
That is a fascinating concept. So that you are instead of, well, how do you say it? The central perspective is like a photographic idea of thinking. These are your words in that book.
Yeah.
And there has to be room for more perspectives.
Oh yes, and of course, every time.
But that's also
we have to be vigilant about that, because I was thinking about that in this night with the last work I'm striving so much with, that you can make things that works against the nature in some ways, but it must be very little.
Yeah.
Little, very little, and it can work. A sort of just like you are swinging and you see the nature like that for the first time.
Yeah.
There is something that is wrong because you haven't got it totally. And that's interesting, actually.
And that's a fine balance to how much do you invent before it becomes surrealism? That balance between those things.
Or the work, if you work hard and you work and you work and it goes to hell every time, then you will get something that you can use the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But you have to be on the bottom. Oh, miserable faults with the material. And then suddenly it comes something. Oh, perhaps this, that. Light that can bring it back to life. Yeah, okay.
Mm.
Er vi ferdige nå?